Alrighty, well, in half an hour I gotta go to work, so that's what I'm going to do in a half an hour. I'm going to go back and finish up the chores with the animals, get the chickens fed, make sure everybody's got enough food and water, give the dog his second scoop of food, just make sure everybody's okay, gather up the eggs and put them away, and so on, get them washed up and out to the egg fridge and all that. We're definitely going to need more eggs because people have been buying them, I'll tell you. The sold out sign was out at the road, and I brought it in because the fridge was full of eggs yesterday. And I come this morning and there's only 4 cartons left. So, they've been buying the eggs anyway, which is good. I mean, that's kind of the point. The people want the people to buy the eggs. I mean, the owners of the farm want that. They want for people to buy their eggs and enjoy them, and they're healthy eggs because they're from free-range chickens. You notice the difference when you eat them as opposed to eggs from a factory farm that have been, basically squeezed out of the chickens under duress and then have sat around in trucks and warehouses and everything for long periods of time before they get to the factory, before they get to the store. In our case, well, what's happening there at that farm, when I gather the eggs tonight, I'll wash them up and I'll put them in the cartons and I'll put them out in the out where they're sold in the egg fridge, and like they'll literally be, you could go in there 5 minutes after I put them in there and buy them, and like they're literally laid today. If you come tomorrow, well, you're going to get eggs that were laid today or yesterday or the day before, but at most they'll be a few days old. They're not going to be weeks old, and they're raised by very happy chickens. They're raised by chickens who are living the way chickens are supposed to live. Because chickens aren't supposed to live in an enclosed little place there and never see the sun and never peck at the ground, and never eat grubs and things like that. And, that's not how chickens are supposed to live, really. And when you get something living in an unnatural way, then what you get is you get an unnatural product at the other end. You get something that just doesn't have what it's supposed to have, So, plus, like anything else, eggs will deteriorate over time. So if you're buying eggs in the grocery store that are already a month old or more, they've had a month to deteriorate, to lose their nutritional value. Whereas, whatever nutritional value they have. But if you buy them fresh from a farm, well, you're going to get them literally. I mean, when I picked some of those eggs up yesterday, they were warm because the chicken was actually on top of them. So they were warm, and they're fresh. I mean, those eggs you saw me pick up yesterday, they were laid yesterday. The eggs I pick up today, those are eggs that would have been laid today, and so on. I picked up some this morning, so I don't know how many, if any, there'll be tonight, but there'll be some anyway, probably, hopefully. Anyway, on to another topic. I noticed something, and this is something that the woke people tend to do, and it's kind of a dirty thing that they do, really. It's a way of arguing that's designed to put you on the defensive if you don't agree with them. What they do is they'll accuse you of doing something you're not actually doing. And it'll be some nasty, hateful thing that you wouldn't do, that you're not doing, nor would you do it, but they'll accuse you. They'll say, oh yeah, that's what you're doing. For example, this morning I saw a bunch of posts about how apparently those of us who don't support Joe Biden, the current U.S. president, apparently we make fun of him for stuttering. And they showed him talking or whatever and stuttering and whatnot, and they say, well, he stuttered since he was a little boy, and it's not right. It's mean to make fun of him for that, which I agree with. I think that it is mean to make fun of anybody for having a stutter. That's not nice to make fun of somebody for having a speech impediment. You know, so I would agree, except for the fact that's not what we're doing. When we say that Joe Biden sounds, it just sounds like gibberish and nonsense that's coming out of him when he talks. I can tell you I say that sometimes, and I'm not talking about his stutter. That's not what bothers me. A person with a stutter they have trouble getting the words out, but what they say makes sense. And what they say will be in context. And the things that they say will be in the same context as the other things that they're saying. So when they make a sentence, when they string a sentence together, they have trouble getting the words out. So, they do that, trying to get the words out. But when they get the words out, what they say, generally it makes sense. And generally it fits with the conversation, and generally it fits with what they're saying. Like they'll string together a sentence that makes sense. But with Joe Biden, what he'll do is he'll get, let's say he's talking about Donald Trump, who obviously is his rival, his political rival, and he'll want to say Donald Trump is bad for America. I'm just making a thing up here. I'm doing this as an example. I'm not saying that he has actually said that. I don't know if he said it or not. But what I'm saying is that that would be the intention, just as an example of what I'm talking about. Now, I mean, you may agree with that statement or you may disagree with it, but it's at least a coherent and sensible statement. You can understand what he's driving at if he says that. But instead, what he will say is, and he'll say it with a stutter, yes, but the stutter isn't the issue. He'll say something along the lines of, Donald Trump is a space orangutan, and my uncle used to say that a Studebaker's a good car when I was working as a mechanic at a Ford dealership in Bangor, Maine, and his wife, my Aunt Bernice, she loved sauerkraut, and ice cream is good. That's what he'll do. And that's why, we're saying there's something wrong. There's something isn't adding up with this guy. If he was just to say Donald Trump is bad for America or something like that, well, we'd say we'd either agree with him or disagree with him. But we wouldn't be saying that he's incoherent or anything. The reason we're saying it is because that's the example I gave. That's the way he talks, and he brings all kinds of stuff in from left field that has nothing. He kind of goes from one thing to another. He brings it all in from left field, and then he just switches channels, and he's off on some other tangent, and it doesn't even flow smoothly. It's like, I was boarding Air Force One the other day, and strawberries are on sale at Walmart for $1.99 a pound. Or something. I mean, this is what he does. And that's the reason that we're saying there's something not right there. And it isn't really a matter of making fun of him, although I'm sure some people do, because it's really not right to make fun of somebody who has dementia either. I can tell you when I point it out, I don't point it out to make fun of the guy. I don't like the guy, but I'm not going to make fun of him if he's losing his mind. I think that's a bad thing. I don't wish that on anyone, or whether I like them or not. But the issue is, this guy is the President of the United States. He's the representative of the most powerful nation on the planet. He's meeting with world leaders, he's discussing serious things. He's discussing trade. He's discussing, situations that may lead to war. He's discussing all sorts of things that can be devastating for people not just in the United States, but all over the world. What the United States does tends to affect not just the United States. And so when you get somebody like that and he can't be taken seriously because he's rambling on about everything and nothing all at the same time, and that's not a good thing. I've got a bit of a stutter myself. I do, and sometimes I have trouble finding a word or whatever. That is an issue for me. But I mean, with this guy, it's like something right out of left field. He's going one way, and then all of a sudden he's off on something else. And the other thing is, if you actually look into it, you'll find out that he didn't have an uncle by that name, and he didn't have an aunt by that name, and he never was a Ford mechanic, and he's never been to Bangor, Maine. And, if you actually look into it, you'll find out none of that is true. So on top of that, he's either lying or he's delusional. He thinks it's true because he's got an issue cognitively, or he is a liar. And of course, if we look back over his career, he has a long history of telling lies. So there is that. Now, at the same time, I know Donald Trump is crude and rude and so on. He's definitely, I guess you could say, he's got kind of a boorish personality. And he can be a bit of a class bully. He'd get up there and make fun of people and stuff like that, which I don't like that. I wish he wouldn't do that. But I will say this, at least when he was in power, the economy in the United States was a lot better. There were more people working. There were fewer people going to jail. The country just in general was more productive. The cost of living was lower. And they weren't fighting wars all over Hell's Half Acre. But now everything the opposite is happening, and now they want to bring in a draft. They want to draft American young people into a war. Now I'm up here in Canada, and I'm 56 years old. In fact, I turned 56 today. This is my 56th birthday. But I can tell you, so I'm probably not going to be drafted, not likely. But the bottom line is, there's a lot of kids coming up now that will be in the United States. And if they institute something like that in Canada, which they may do at some point, it'll affect the kids here too. But for the time being, they're doing this down in the United States. Some of you who are American may be affected by it, or you may have children or grandchildren who be affected by it. And, that's got to be a cause of worry for you. Nobody wants their kids or their grandkids to have to go and fight in a war. Those of us who are old enough that we remember war veterans from World War II and Korea and Vietnam and everything, we've seen firsthand what war does to a person, and that's the ones who survived. We never met the ones who didn't survive. At least I didn't, because I was born in 1968, so I didn't meet the ones who didn't survive. They were already dead for a couple of decades before I came along. But I saw what the war did to the ones who survived, and I saw the effects of that at different times in my life, and I'm slapping myself because mosquitoes are biting me. And it's pretty horrific. And having seen that, being old enough to have seen that, if I had children, which I don't, but if I had children, the last thing I would want is for them to have to go to a war. And when I was young, the idea of going to a war scared the hell out of me. It's not something I would want. My blood would have run cold if war had broken out. And I was told by the government here, well, you gotta go and go for basic training and everything and be in the army. Because we need guys to go over and fight these people, or whatever. I mean, that'd scare the hell out of me if that had happened to me when I was a young man. I was fortunate that it didn't. There was a guy in my hometown of Perth, Ontario, and he was an American. Everybody called him Bifford Bonk. That's what they called him, Bifford Bonk. But his name, his real name was Thomas Mick something. It was like an Irish name, kind of, or a Scottish name, maybe. I can't remember now exactly what his name was, but it was one of those MC type names, Thomas Mick something. Anyway, he was a draft dodger from the Vietnam War. He was young back in the 60s. He was a young man, and he got his draft notice. And he wasn't a very big man. Now, he was heavy into dope and whatnot. I know being up here he was very heavy into dope and whatnot. But he was actually one of the most intelligent and thoughtful people you'd ever meet. Very mild-mannered, very soft-spoken, very smart. You wouldn't know it with a nickname like Bifford Bonk, and you certainly wouldn't know it even to look at him. He was a pretty scraggly-looking character, you know. And he had lived in storage lockers, and he lived in the back of a step van, and he pretty much lived the life I'm living now. And look at me, I'm getting pretty scraggly looking too. But the bottom line is this. He was a very intelligent man. If you took the time to speak to him, which I did, it would blow you away how smart he was. But he also wasn't a very big man, and that figures into the story. Because what he did when he got his draft notice is he went to see another man who had already been there. Another man who he knew that lived in his hometown. And he showed the guy his draft notice, and he says, what should I do? Like, how do you advise me? And if I go over there, what can I expect? You know, what's your advice to me about this? And the guy told him, he said, get your ass up to Canada. He said, they're not going to deport you back here or anything. If you can make it across the border, you'll be fine. But he said, whatever you do not go to Vietnam, because he said, you're a small man, and what they'll do is they'll make you a tunnel rat. And they'll put you down in the tunnels there that the Viet Cong have dug. And he said, you won't come out of there. He said, a tunnel rat has a life expectancy of 3 days in Vietnam. He said, it's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. Now that man, he had to leave everything he knew and come up here to a place where he didn't know anything. You know, as a young man, imagine how frightened he must have been. And he had to start over again. He had to build a life up here. He couldn't go back over there, because if he went back over there, he was technically he was a criminal over there, because he was a draft dodger, and they had to put him in jail. So he couldn't go back over. I mean, there wasn't eventually an there I know that, but there were quite a few years where they couldn't return, you know. I mean, nowadays those guys can return to the United States if they choose to, but back then they couldn't. And anyway, bottom line is, though, imagine having to face up to that. Just as a young man. I don't know how old he was, but he can't have been very old when he received that letter in the mail from the draft board. You know, bottom line is, the president down there in the States, you know, you got to have somebody who's coherent. You got to have somebody who's aware of what's going on around them. And there is good reason to suspect that Joe Biden is neither of those things. And like I say,